I stepped off the plane with the kind of confidence that only comes after weeks of believing in a fantasy. 6 weeks in Colombia, a whirlwind affair with Dr. Trey Matthews, had left me intoxicated with charm, sunsets, and whispered promises I half believed in. I thought I'd return home with a heart full of adventure and a story worth savoring. But one phone call shattered it all before I even reached the terminal. Rick, my husband, had found a way to invade my carefully constructed illusion. One brief conversation, laced with quiet fury and a precision I could never rival, ended my romantic escape before it even had a chance to breathe. Trey's voice, once tender and intoxicating, turned sharp and cruel as he mocked me for believing anything could last between us. The affair ended not with anger or passion, but with ice, a coldness I could not melt. Returning to my office at the Ambassador Hotel, I encountered Penny, my colleague and friend, whose own private turmoil mirrored my fears. She whispered nervously that Rick had threatened to expose her own affair. Her husband, Josh, had refused forgiveness and handed her divorce papers, legal and final. I felt a cold shiver, imagining that soon those same documents could be waiting for me, a tangible symbol of the life I had already started losing. Yet, as I glanced around the empty lobby, there was no one, and the only sound was the hum of the elevator, a reminder that fear can be louder than reality. I moved through the Ambassador, only to find the first signs of Rick's retribution. My credit cards were blocked. My phone, the only line to Trey, was disconnected. A man in a tailored suit handed me a sealed envelope, Rick's handwriting on the outside. My heart pounded as I tore it open, bracing for what I already knew would be merciless. Inside was a letter that carried the weight of calculated vengeance. Rick detailed every misstep I had made in the past year. My indiscretions, my choices, my secret romances. He had liquidated our home, emptied the bank accounts, and was preparing to leave on a long, indefinite journey. The letter was a blueprint for destruction. He intended to fire both Trey and me from the hospital, wielding the evidence of my affairs as a weapon against our careers. The threats didn't stop there. Rick had already shared photos and videos with the hospital HR, evidence of my extracurricular liaisons, and warned of a lawsuit if any attempt was made to contest his actions. He had even given the children copies, ensuring they would know the truth about our marriage. Among the legal and personal chaos, he left a single, almost mocking gesture: a $500 Visa gift card, a hollow peace offering, and a reminder that he would not block the divorce. Rage and humiliation collided within me, but I refused to bow to it completely. At the hotel, I attempted to book a room with the gift card, only to be challenged by the clerk for ID and a deposit. Despite the embarrassment, I found the funds necessary and secured a room. Alone in that temporary refuge, I recalled my decision to choose Trey over Rick, my hubris in assuming Rick lacked character. My mind reeled with the consequences of my arrogance. I had underestimated Rick, and now I faced the fallout. No home, no financial security, no allies. Yet beneath the fear, a seed of determination took root. If Rick thought he could destroy me entirely, he had misjudged my resolve. Attempts to regain control were immediately thwarted. The bank confirmed the closure of my accounts. Calls to my children went unanswered. I went to the hospital, desperate to refute Rick's allegations. There, Ms. Washington, the HR manager, presented me with the evidence Rick had compiled: photographs, videos, and the reports of a private investigator. The threat of legal action for moral misconduct hung over me, and despite my protests, she reminded me that the hospital's code allowed for termination in the event of public scandals. The following hours were a blur of humiliation. Ms. Washington informed me of my suspension without pay, citing the board's need to protect the institution from potential litigation and public outrage. I was escorted from the hospital by security, whispers and side glances following me like shadows. Trey, once a symbol of passion and escape, now explained how Rick had delivered the damning evidence to HR, threatening his career as well. Confrontations piled atop one another. Trey defended himself, insisting he never intended to humiliate me publicly, while I accused him of betrayal in Colombia. Security lingered nearby, tense, their presence a constant reminder of the boundaries I could no longer cross. Amid the chaos, I ran into Leslie, a neighbor who knew of my plight. She chastised me for my manipulations, my recklessness. I fired back, placing the blame squarely on Rick, the architect of my current misery. I was officially terminated, my bank accounts frozen, my home sold. Former colleagues, once familiar allies, refused to assist. I returned to the hotel, alone, vulnerable, stripped of dignity. Legal avenues seemed equally closed. Attorneys declined representation. Then Rick's letter arrived once more, instructing me to retrieve my belongings from a storage unit. Exhausted, I went, confronted with boxes of my past. Objects, letters, photographs, reminders of the marriage that had once defined me. Among the clutter, I found an old photograph, stirring a mix of nostalgia and anger. Personal keepsakes and love letters, once treasured, now served as ammunition for my resolve. My former home, now in the hands of Emily Wellman, stood as a monument to my loss. Emily's appearance, older, perhaps weighed down by her own struggles, did nothing to soften my fury. I realized, as Rick had intended, that everything I once held dear had been stripped away. Financially, I was in ruins. The gift card had been depleted. I was relegated to a cheap motel, my pride battered, but not entirely broken. Trey's departure from the hospital compounded my isolation, leaving a hollow void where once there had been romance and companionship. Efforts to locate Rick through mutual contacts proved fruitless. Even Ferris, our mutual friend, refused to betray Rick, leaving me stranded in desperation. My termination was final, and I was forced to pawn cherished jewelry just to survive. Divorce proceedings loomed ahead, complicated by missing funds and the impossibility of predicting a favorable outcome. Rick's orchestrated campaign had left me beaten, humiliated, and financially ruined. Yet, amid the wreckage, I began to comprehend the depth of my arrogance, the seeds of vengeance I had sown in our marriage. One reckless decision, one moment of misplaced trust, had unleashed a storm of retribution beyond my imagination. The following morning, the hotel room felt smaller than ever. Sunlight slanted across the peeling wallpaper, catching dust motes that danced like tiny reminders of how fragile my life had become. I sat on the edge of the bed, sifting through old love letters, trying to reconcile the woman I had been with, the woman I had become. Every word Trey had whispered, every promise I had once believed, now echoed back with a bitter aftertaste. Rick had won. He had stripped away every illusion I had clung to, and yet somewhere deep in my chest a spark of defiance remained. I tried calling the bank again. Every number I dialed returned a curt, automated message. Accounts closed, cards invalid, lines disconnected. My fingers trembled on the phone as I attempted to reach my children, but their voices were absent, replaced by silence that felt like betrayal. I was cut off from everything that had once anchored me: my finances, my home, my family. I had to act, but where to start? I made my way to the hospital, determined to refute Rick's claims in person. The HR office was cold, clinical, a shrine to bureaucracy and silent judgment. Ms. Washington greeted me with a steely expression. She laid out the evidence Rick had compiled: photos, video footage, statements from a private investigator. Her voice was calm but unyielding. The hospital's moral code, she reminded me, allowed for termination in cases of public scandal. I denied the accusations, but my words felt hollow against the weight of proof Rick had meticulously gathered. Soon after, Ms. Washington delivered the final blow: suspension without pay. The board sought to protect themselves from litigation and the glare of public scrutiny. I stood there, numb, as a security guard escorted me out. Staff glanced at me with curiosity, disdain, even pity. Trey appeared briefly, anxious, explaining how Rick's evidence threatened not just my career, but his own. I wanted to scream at him, blame him for the affair, for the humiliation. But I held my tongue, knowing anger alone would not reclaim my life. Outside, the city air hit me like a slap. I ran into Leslie, my neighbor, who didn't hide her judgment. She criticized my manipulations, my reckless decisions, my failure to foresee consequences. I countered, blaming Rick, calling him ruthless, but the words sounded weak even to my own ears. Everywhere I turned, I was reminded that my empire, the life I had built, was gone. My home had been sold, my bank accounts frozen, colleagues refused to help. Every attempt to find solace or assistance ended in rejection or silence. The storage unit was my next destination. Rick's letter had instructed me to collect my belongings. I entered the dim, dusty space and confronted the physical remnants of a life destroyed. Boxes filled with personal items, love letters, photographs. I held each item as though it could somehow reconstruct the past. I found an old photograph of Rick and me, smiling in a time when our love had seemed invincible. Now it was a dagger in my chest, a cruel reminder of what I had lost and what I had done to provoke Rick's wrath. At the door of the home's new owners, I met Emily Wellman. Older than I had anticipated, her expression betrayed empathy, yet I was too consumed by rage to accept it. Rick's letter had revealed the home sale, and now Emily lived there, a living testament to my loss. I felt fury and helplessness in equal measure. Every memory, every possession, every intimate detail of my life had been stripped away by Rick's meticulous planning. Financial pressure mounted. The gift card Rick had left me was gone. I relocated to a cheap motel, my pride battered, but intact. The emptiness was suffocating, the loneliness palpable. Trey had left the hospital, abandoning any connection to the chaos. Friends and colleagues, too fearful of Rick or too disgusted by scandal, turned away. I realized with bitter clarity that survival meant finding a new path entirely on my own. Phone calls to mutual acquaintances to locate Rick proved futile. Ferris, once a friend, refused assistance, defending Rick as if he were untouchable. I was isolated, financially depleted, and emotionally exhausted. In desperation, I pawned personal jewelry, a painful but necessary choice to maintain a semblance of independence. Divorce proceedings loomed like a dark horizon, complicated by vanished funds, and the certainty that legal victory was far from guaranteed. As I sat in the motel room, staring at the muted glow of the streetlights, I finally understood the magnitude of my arrogance. Every risk I had taken, every deception I had hidden, every choice I had made against Rick's awareness, had sparked the inferno, consuming my life. I felt crushed, yet amid the despair, a faint ember of resolve remained. If Rick thought he had broken me entirely, he was mistaken. I had nowhere to turn, no home, no money, no allies, but I still had my mind. And if I had that, perhaps, just perhaps, I could fight back. Days blurred into nights as I navigated a life stripped bare. My career was in ruins, my reputation shredded, my finances non-existent. Every call to the bank ended with the same cold confirmation. Rick had closed the accounts. My attempts to reach my children were met with silence, a painful reminder of the walls he had erected between me and the life I had once known. I tried to stand tall, to reclaim some control. I walked the streets near the hospital, searching for a way to refute Rick's allegations. The HR office, once a place of potential support, had become a courtroom where I was both accused and judged. Ms. Washington had laid out the evidence: photographs, video footage, detailed statements from a private investigator. The moral code of the hospital was clear. Any public scandal could justify termination. I argued, denied, pleaded, but she only reminded me of the clauses Rick had weaponized against me. The suspension without pay left me reeling. I felt stripped of dignity as the security guard escorted me through the hospital corridors. Whispers followed me, eyes judged me. Trey appeared briefly, his face tight with concern. He explained how Rick had sent all evidence to HR, threatening his career too. I wanted to scream at him, to accuse him of betrayal, but my voice caught in my throat. Rage alone would not undo the devastation. Back in the empty streets, I encountered Leslie. Her criticism was sharp, cutting to the core of my shame. She spoke of manipulation, reckless behavior, and the inevitable consequences I had ignored. I argued back, blaming Rick, calling him cruel and calculating, but the words felt weak even to my own ears. The city itself seemed to conspire against me. Every familiar landmark now reminded me of the life I had lost. The storage unit became my reluctant sanctuary. Rick's instructions were precise: retrieve your belongings. I entered the dusty, dim space and confronted the tangible remnants of my former life. Boxes filled with letters, photographs, and mementos, a museum of my mistakes and memories. One photograph of Rick and me, smiling in happier times, pierced my heart. Nostalgia mingled with fury. My possessions, my home, even the intimacy I had shared, were now instruments of humiliation. Meeting Emily Wellman, the new owner of my house, was another blow. Older than I imagined, with the weariness of someone who had endured her own struggles, she offered sympathy. I could not accept it. Rick had orchestrated the sale of the house and turned my sanctuary into someone else's territory. Every corner, every room, every memory was now a battlefield where I had already lost. Financial strain pressed in. The Visa gift card Rick left had long since been spent. Motel rooms became my temporary home, each night a stark reminder of my fall. Trey's departure from the hospital severed the last lingering thread of comfort, leaving me to navigate my isolation alone. Friends and former colleagues turned away, fearful or disgusted. Desperation forced me to pawn jewelry, the final act of survival in a life that had spiraled out of control. Legal recourse seemed like a distant dream. Attorneys refused representation, unwilling to challenge Rick's meticulous preparation. Divorce loomed, complicated by missing funds and the uncertainty of outcome. I felt powerless, stripped of autonomy, a pawn in Rick's elaborate game. And yet, beneath the crushing weight of despair, a faint ember of determination persisted. I had been broken, humiliated, and isolated, but not entirely defeated. Rick had underestimated the capacity for resilience, for strategy, for vengeance that I could summon. I realized that if I had no home, no allies, no financial support, I still had the one thing Rick could never take: my mind. And with it, perhaps, the beginnings of a plan. Sitting in the dim motel room, sifting through letters and remnants of my past, I understood the stakes. Rick had orchestrated my ruin with precision, but every move he made also revealed patterns, weaknesses, and predictable behaviors. Each letter, each transaction, each calculated threat was a map, an unintentional blueprint for retribution. I didn't yet know how or when, but I understood this truth. Survival alone was not enough. Revenge, strategic and undeniable, would be the path forward. The morning I decided I would no longer be Rick's victim, the world felt different, sharper, colder, yet somehow alive. I had been humiliated, stripped of everything I held dear, and yet the ember of defiance I had nurtured in the quiet motel nights now flared into something potent: a plan. Rick had underestimated me, overplayed his hand, and in doing so he left cracks, tiny openings through which I could reclaim my life and assert control. I began quietly, methodically. Calls to legal contacts, research on property law, employment codes, and divorce procedures consumed my days. Every denial, every rebuff from attorneys only sharpened my focus. I could not rely on anyone to fight for me. This battle was mine alone. I dug through every detail of Rick's actions, every transaction he had made, every message he had sent. Each one was a thread I could pull, each one a potential lever to shift the balance. Then came the first breakthrough. While reviewing documents Rick had sent regarding the house and storage unit, I found discrepancies, small financial oversights, gaps in authorization, legal missteps. Not enough to reverse everything immediately, but enough to build leverage. I began contacting Rick indirectly, hinting at legal scrutiny, at audits, at complications he hadn't anticipated. His confidence, so carefully maintained, faltered in subtle ways that only I could detect. The hospital remained a battleground. Rick's HR maneuvers had temporarily removed me from my position. But he had underestimated the ripple effect of public perception. I quietly reached out to sympathetic colleagues, presenting facts without emotion, showing how his actions violated policies and could expose the institution to liability. Word began to circulate, not about my misdeeds, but about Rick's overreach, his vindictive streak. The whispers that once crushed me now shifted in tone, planting doubt about his judgment and fairness. Financial pressure remained, but I adapted. Pawned jewelry, motel stays, and resourcefulness became my tools. Each day, I reclaimed a fraction of independence, a fragment of dignity. I was careful, calculating, every move measured to avoid exposure, to ensure that when the time came, my retaliation would be precise, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Rick, oblivious to the slow erosion of his control, continued to act as though victory was absolute. Yet cracks appeared. Small things. Delayed responses. Curt messages. Hints of anxiety in his voice when I indirectly confronted him with potential audits and legal oversights. I realized he had always relied on intimidation. on fear. Remove the fear, and the foundation of his power crumbled. Then came the confrontation I had envisioned, though never in such a dramatic form. I appeared at the hospital, armed with facts, documentation, and a calmness that belied the storm within. Rick's expression shifted from smug superiority to disbelief as I outlined the inconsistencies, the legal vulnerabilities, and the institutional exposure he had created. Colleagues looked on, some shocked, some quietly approving. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of power. Not cruelty, not vengeance for its own sake, but the satisfaction of reclaiming agency in a life that had been stolen. Simultaneously, I targeted the personal realm. The home, the storage unit, the belongings Rick had taken control of. Every detail I leveraged strategically. I negotiated with Emily Wellman, the new owner, presenting legal documentation and subtle pressure that compelled her cooperation. Slowly, methodically, I retrieved personal items, letters, and objects that held both sentimental and strategic value. Each recovery was a small victory, a restoration of self. By the time the legal battles reached their formal stages, I was no longer desperate. I was calculated, precise, and untouchable in ways Rick had not anticipated. Divorce proceedings, once a source of fear, became an arena for my assertion. With meticulous preparation, I navigated the complexities, leveraging every document, every witness, every oversight to ensure that Rick's campaign of humiliation and destruction could not succeed entirely. The climax was not a single explosive moment, but a series of undeniable revelations. Rick, confronted by the slow, inevitable collapse of his overconfidence, was forced to acknowledge the limits of his control. I did not gloat. I did not seek petty revenge. I claimed what was mine through strategy, intelligence, and resilience. The home remained in Emily's possession, yes, but personal belongings, letters, and memories were returned. Employment records were corrected, reputations quietly restored, and Rick's manipulations exposed in ways that prevented him from further harm. In the quiet aftermath, I sat in the modest motel room I had transformed into a headquarters of recovery. Every lesson I had learned, the arrogance, the betrayal, the humiliation, was cataloged in my mind. I realized that my downfall had been as much my own doing as Rick's. But understanding bred clarity. I had survived, adapted, and reclaimed my life. I had proven above all that control over one's destiny is never fully in the hands of others. Rick had engineered chaos, but he had underestimated the power of calculated resilience. I had turned despair into strategy, humiliation into leverage, and loss into reclamation. In the end, the victory was mine. Not of vengeance, not of malice, but of survival, intelligence, and the unwavering determination to rise above a storm meticulously designed to destroy me. I finally understood the truth. Power does not belong to those who wield fear, but to those who endure, adapt, and reclaim themselves. And in that understanding, I found a calm, undeniable triumph that no threat, no betrayal, no manipulation could ever take away.